Raptors Global Ambassador Aubrey Drake Graham, who on Instagram posted the other week, I want to get this quote correct, even though it's a very short quote. At WNBA, I need a Toronto team. Megan McPeak. Does Drake need a Toronto team, or does the WNBA need a Toronto team?
I think basketball fans would love one in Canada. And I think when you look at the landscape of the game of basketball and the growth that it's had in Canada over the last decade, we'll say, and especially the success that the Canadian women's senior national team has had, which has been more successful than the men's senior national team, unfortunately. And hopefully they're on the path of changing that narrative for the men's side and being as successful as the women have been in the last decade. I think the game has continued to grow, and it especially grows on the female side of things. More female athletes are wanting to play the game of basketball. And it's much like soccer, where you don't need a lot to play the game of basketball. You need a couple hoops, whether that is a physical, actual basketball hoop, or, throw it back to Dr. James Naismith, a peach basket, or any sort of, device that can catch a ball. You don't even need a basketball. You can play basketball with the soccer ball as long as you can learn the game and the fundamentals. Dribbling, you can figure out if you don't have an actual basketball, but you can play the game with anything. Much like soccer. So it's very inexpensive versus other sports, hockey. And I think, you see players like Kayla Alexander, Bridget Carlton, Natalie Achonwa, excuse me, my apologies, Kia Nurse, and the growth of the game, the Tatum sisters, who have been part of the senior women's national team and have subsequently retired prior to this last Olympics. The women's game continues to grow, and you have more and more young players as part of the Canadian women's senior national team program continuing to flourish, whether it's, getting looks at training camp rosters within the WNBA, going overseas and playing with really great teams. The more that these women are put on the front stage and shown the support from the entire country of Canada, you see more access to these players. You see more young girls wanting to look up to these players. And over the course of the last couple of years, the WNBA has become more accessible to fans in Canada for watching, whether it's seeing games on TSN and Sportsnet, having access to WNBA League Pass for the inexpensive cost of under $20 for the entire season. Not just a game, entire season. So the more accessible the game becomes, the more young girls will want to play the game and see themselves as professional basketball players. So the thought that they could then have the ability to not only play the game at the professional level, but potentially have the dream of playing on home soil, I think that's where you see the dream continue to grow, and they hope it becomes a reality. And I think for those young girls, that's what they would like to see, is to have their own team within Canada so that they can cheer on a team in Canada and not just the Canadians playing within the WNBA.
Right. And we've discussed this before. Like, if there's a league that can expand by if there's a league that can expand by a couple of teams without diluting the talent pool, it's the WNBA. Because how many teams are in the WNBA right now? It's
right now 12. And the caveat, though, is keep in mind that if the WNBA expands, and this doesn't even include Toronto, if the WNBA expands anywhere, what people sometimes forget is when you have an expansion team, that means there is an expansion draft, which means teams will change, because typically teams can only protect a certain amount of players that will not be added to the pool of players for the expansion draft. So if you love your team and you don't want to see it change, you have to keep that in mind. Expansion means expansion draft, which means rosters will change. So that's the caveat that fans have to keep in mind.
But again, if we're doing the math, right, it's
144 players.
144 players. So you can bump that to, my math is not good, 156, 168, whatever it is, without any drop off in the level of talent, because there's 12 more people outside the WNBA that are good enough to play right now. There's 24 more people. It's not like Major League Soccer, which seems to add new teams like every season, to the point that a lot of people look at Major League Soccer and wonder if it's a pyramid scheme, just kind of wringing these expansion fees from these different people, growing faster and faster than maybe the talent pools can support. Dave Zirin, if you're running a WNBA team in Toronto, who are you building around?
The person I'm building around is currently being inspired by people like Kia Nurse, coming up in high school, and is going to change the league forever. Because I think the great unknown in terms of what kind of talent can Canada produce is something that's going to get an injection of absolute adrenaline from the existence of a Toronto WNBA team. I see it as a no-brainer in terms of what we know about basketball support in the city, in terms of what we know about what's happened generationally, not just in Toronto, but in the country over the last 10 years. Basketball has made what can only be described as a giant leap forward. And this is the place. I mean, if the WNBA has a model where it wants to build locally for the purposes of becoming a national brand, it's hard to see anywhere that's going to be more fertile territory for that sort of local building perspective than in a country that is basketball mad and does not have a team.
Yeah, well, you know who I'm building my Toronto WNBA team around? I think she's still in school. I had to look up the name because I could picture her. I was like, point guard, little firecracker. She's from Pickering, played at Arizona State, but I could not remember the name. Shayna Pellington. Whenever she's ready to play, I'm ready to watch. Let's do this. Megan McPeak, who are you building your Toronto WNBA team around?
Luckily for me, I'm not a general manager, so I don't have to figure that out. But the crop of talent is widely successful that I think you look at, not necessarily a true, like a longtime veteran player, maybe someone who is, 6 years of service or under currently in the W, or with the exception to Dave's point, it could be somebody who is, maybe a junior or senior in high school right now and is starting to gain notoriety, or someone who might be a rookie or a freshman or a sophomore in college right now. But luckily, I only have to talk about the players and talk about the game. I don't have to figure out the interworkings of putting a roster together, and I do not envy the GMs that have to do it.